I am 73 years old now, and when I close my eyes, I can still smell the antiseptic sting of that hospital room, can still feel the cold bite of the IV needle in my arm, can still hear the mechanical rhythm of machines keeping time with my failing heart. They told me I had maybe days, maybe hours. My body had finally surrendered to decades of diabetes and heart disease. And as I lay there in that narrow bed with the pale green walls closing in around me, I thought about all the years I had lived, all the sacrifices I had made, all the love I had poured into the people I called my children. I thought death would be gentle when it came for me. I thought I would slip away knowing I had done right by my family. I never imagined that in my darkest hour, in those moments when I was clinging to life by the thinnest thread, my own blood would be celebrating my departure like it was Christmas morning. My name is Eleanor, though everyone who ever loved me called me Ellie. I grew up poor in a small town where the railroad tracks divided the fortunate from the forgotten, and my family lived on the wrong side of those tracks. My father worked himself to death in the steel mill, and my mother took in laundry until her hands were raw and cracked like dried earth. I learned early that life owed you nothing, that everything worth having had to be earned through sweat and stubbornness. When I met Richard at 21, I thought I had found my salvation. He was handsome in that dangerous way that makes young girls foolish, with dark eyes that promised adventure and a smile that could melt winter. We married 3 months after we met, in a small ceremony at the courthouse with 2 strangers as witnesses, and I wore a dress my mother had sewn from fabric she could barely afford. Richard was a dreamer, always chasing the next big opportunity, the next scheme that would make us rich. For 15 years I followed him from town to town, job to job, believing in his visions even when they crumbled to dust in our hands. We had 3 children during those wandering years. First came Michael, serious and watchful even as a baby, with his father's dark eyes but none of his recklessness. Then Sarah, 2 years later, beautiful and bright as a copper penny, always laughing, always dancing through life like it was a stage built just for her. And finally, Thomas, my baby, born when I was 38, and the doctors said I was too old for another child. Thomas was gentle, quiet, the kind of boy who brought home injured birds and cried when the seasons changed. When Richard left us, Thomas was only 6 years old. I came home from my shift at the diner to find a note on the kitchen table, written on the back of an unpaid electric bill. I'm sorry, Ellie. I'm not built for this life. I'm suffocating. The kids will be better off without me. Just like that, 15 years dissolved into 15 words. I stood in that kitchen with the note trembling in my hands, and I didn't cry. I couldn't afford to cry. I had 3 children sleeping in the next room, and crying wouldn't put food on the table, or keep the lights on. The years that followed were the hardest of my life, but also the ones that defined me. I worked 3 jobs, sometimes 4. I waited tables at the diner from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, cleaned offices downtown until 8 at night, and took in sewing on the weekends. I slept maybe 4 hours a night, and even then, I often woke from dreams of falling, of drowning, of failing my children. But I never let them see me break. I packed their lunches with notes that said I loved them, attended every parent-teacher conference no matter how exhausted I was, helped with homework at midnight after finishing my last job. I wore the same 3 dresses for years, patched and re-patched until they were more thread than fabric, so that Sarah could have new shoes for school and Michael could join the baseball team. Michael was the first to leave, going off to college on a partial scholarship I had supplemented with every spare penny I could scrape together. He studied business and economics, hungry for the financial security we had never had. He called every Sunday for the first year, then every other Sunday, then monthly, then only on holidays. I told myself it was natural, that children grew up and built their own lives, that the distance was a sign I had succeeded in giving him wings. But late at night, I sometimes wondered if he was ashamed of where he came from, of the mother who showed up to his college graduation in a 10-year-old dress and shoes held together with glue. Sarah left next, chasing dreams of becoming an actress in Los Angeles. She was 20 when she went, and I stood at the bus station holding her tight, breathing in the vanilla scent of her shampoo, memorizing the feel of her in my arms because I knew Somehow. That she was leaving in a way that would be permanent. "I'll come back, Mama," she whispered against my shoulder. "When I'm famous, I'll buy you a big house and you'll never have to work again." I smiled and told her I believed in her, and I did. But I also knew that life had a way of changing people, that distance could erode even the strongest bonds. Thomas stayed the longest. He went to community college, lived at home, helped with bills when he could. We would sit together on the porch on summer evenings, drinking sweet tea, and watching the fireflies dance in the twilight, and he would tell me about the books he was reading, the poems he was writing, the world he saw when he closed his eyes. He was my gentle boy, my tender-hearted son, and I loved him with a fierceness that sometimes scared me. When he finally moved out at 25, taking a teaching position at a school 3 hours away, I felt the loneliness settle into my bones like winter cold. By the time I was 60, I had finally paid off the small house I had bought 30 years earlier, working myself nearly to death to make every mortgage payment on time. It wasn't much, just a modest 2-bedroom with a garden out back where I grew tomatoes and herbs, but it was mine. I had also saved a bit of money, not a fortune by any means, but enough to feel like I could breathe, like I didn't have to live paycheck to paycheck anymore. I had investments that a kind financial advisor at the bank had helped me set up, an IRA, some bonds. I calculated that when I died, my estate would be worth approximately $350,000, including the house and my savings. It seemed like such a large number to me, someone who had grown up with nothing, who had worn shoes with holes in them well into adulthood. I decided to tell my children about the inheritance one Christmas when they all came home, a rare occurrence that filled me with such joy, I thought my heart might burst. We sat around the small dining table, the same one I had bought at a yard sale when Michael was a baby, and I looked at their faces, these people I had created and shaped and sacrificed everything for. Michael was 45 then, successful in business, wearing an expensive suit even on Christmas Day. Sarah was 43, no longer chasing acting dreams but working in marketing, married to a man named David who talked constantly about his investments. Thomas was 37, still teaching, still writing poetry that would never make him rich but made his eyes light up when he talked about it. "I want you all to know," I said, my voice catching slightly because I had never been good at talking about money or death, "that I've been careful with what little I've had. When I'm gone, there will be something for each of you. Not a fortune, but enough to know that I thought of you, that I wanted to leave you something beyond memories." The room went quiet, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across Michael's face, something I couldn't quite name. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. "Mama, don't talk like that. You're going to live forever." But I saw how her eyes gleamed, saw how she exchanged a glance with her husband. Only Thomas looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair. "Mum, we don't need to talk about this now. You're healthy. You have years ahead of you." But I was 60 and I had worked hard all my life, and I wanted them to know that their struggles, whatever they were, would be eased when I was gone. I wanted them to know that even in death, I would take care of them. It seemed like such a beautiful gift to give. The years passed with the strange acceleration that comes with age. Time, which had crawled during those hard years of raising children alone, now seemed to sprint forward, stealing weeks and months in the blink of an eye. I grew older, more tired. My diabetes worsened, requiring insulin injections and constant monitoring. My heart developed an irregular rhythm that concerned my doctors. I started forgetting things. Small things at first, like where I had put my keys or what day of the week it was, but enough to worry me in the quiet moments. My children visited less and less. Michael came perhaps twice a year, always rushed, always checking his phone, always talking about deals and markets and numbers that meant nothing to me. Sarah called occasionally, her voice bright and distant, telling me about parties and clients and renovations to her house that cost more than I had earned in a year. Thomas still visited most regularly, bringing me books and sitting with me on the porch like we used to. But even he seemed distracted, pulled in too many directions by his work and his own life. I told myself I understood. They were busy. They had their own families, their own problems. The loneliness I felt was selfish, the natural consequence of raising children to be independent. But sometimes, late at night, I would look at old photographs, pictures of birthday parties and school plays and Christmas mornings, and I would wonder where those people had gone. Those children who had looked at me like I hung the moon, who had needed me with every breath they took. Then came the heart attack. It happened on a Tuesday morning while I was watering my tomato plants. One moment I was standing in the warm sunshine, feeling the cool morning air on my face, and the next I was on the ground, pain exploding through my chest like lightning, the garden hose still running, water pooling around me. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, found me and called 911. I remember the ambulance ride, the faces of the paramedics swimming above me, someone saying, "Stay with us, Evanor, stay with us," and then darkness. When I woke up, I was in the ICU, tubes and wires connecting me to machines that beeped and hummed. A doctor with kind eyes and gray hair told me that my heart had suffered significant damage, that the next 48 hours were critical. "We've called your children," he said gently. "They're on their way." But they didn't come. Not the first day, when I drifted in and out of consciousness, my body fighting a battle I wasn't sure I wanted to win. Not the second day, when the nurses spoke in low voices just outside my room, their concern evident in the way they touched my hand, checked my vitals with extra care. It was on the third day, when I was slightly more alert, still terribly weak but no longer quite so close to death's door, that I heard them. I had been moved to a regular room, still serious but stable, and I was drifting in that strange twilight between sleep and waking when I heard voices in the hallway. Familiar voices, my children's voices. For a moment, my heart leaped with a joy that hurt almost as much as the heart attack had. They had come. My babies had come to see me. "Do you think it's happened yet?" That was Sarah, her voice carrying that edge of excitement she used to have on Christmas morning. "The doctor said she's stabilized." Michael's voice, disappointed. "Could be days yet. Maybe weeks." Weeks. Sarah again. And now the excitement was gone, replaced by something that made my blood run cold. "I can't stay here for weeks. I have the Henderson account presentation next Monday. We should start making arrangements anyway." This was Thomas, my gentle boy, but his voice sounded different, harder. "Call the funeral home. Start looking at the will. Figure out how to divide everything. The house alone should be worth $200,000 in this market." Michael now, all business. Plus her savings, the investments she mentioned, we're probably looking at close to $400,000 split 3 ways. They were silent for a moment, and I lay in that bed, my heart monitor beeping steadily, each beep a mockery of the organ that was somehow still functioning despite having just shattered into 1,000 pieces. "We should celebrate," Sarah said, and I heard the smile in her voice. "We've been waiting for this for so long. Mama's been talking about leaving us something for 10 years? 15. And now it's finally happening." "Don't be crass," Thomas said, but there was no real reproach in his voice. "But yes, we should have a drink at least. There's that hotel bar downtown. We can toast to Mom's memory, plan out the logistics." "To Mom's memory." Michael laughed, and it was a sound I had never heard from him before, cruel and empty. "She's not dead yet, Tom. Though at this point, it would be a mercy. You saw what the doctor said. Even if she survives this, she'll need round-the-clock care. Nursing homes cost a fortune. Could eat up half the estate. Unless she doesn't make it out of here." Sarah's voice was so soft I almost didn't hear it. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. "Sarah," Thomas said finally, "that's a terrible thing to say. But we're all thinking it." She sounded defensive now. "I'm just saying what nobody else will. We've all been waiting, planning. We've put our lives on hold for the inheritance Mom promised us. And now when it's finally happening, you want to act like we should be devastated." "I am devastated," Thomas said, but even I could hear the hollowness in his words. "Are you?" Michael challenged. "Are you really? Or are you just performing devastation because that's what good sons are supposed to do?" "Because I'm tired of pretending. I'm tired of listening out of obligation. Tired of listening to her talk about the old days, tired of feeling guilty for having a life of my own. She worked herself to the bone for us," Thomas said, but his voice was weak, uncertain, and we're grateful. Sarah cut in. "But that doesn't mean we have to put our lives on hold now. She had her life. She made her choices. Now it's our turn. I heard the sound of footsteps, and then Michael's voice, closer now, probably right outside my door. Let's just go to the bar. Have a few drinks, make our plans. The nurse said she's sedated anyway. She won't even know we were here. To Mom's inheritance, Sarah said, and I heard the clink of imaginary glasses. To Mom's inheritance. The other two echoed, and then their footsteps faded down the hallway, leaving me alone with the machines and the monitors, and the complete destruction of everything I had believed about my life. I don't remember much about the next few days. I think I retreated somewhere inside myself, to a place where their words couldn't reach me. The nurses must have noticed the change, because they started speaking extra softly around me, touching my hand more often, but I barely registered their presence. I had survived a massive heart attack, only to discover that the people I had given my entire life to, the children I had sacrificed everything for, were already dividing up my possessions before I was even dead, toasting to my demise like it was something to celebrate. By some cruel miracle, I began to recover. My heart, broken as it was in every metaphorical sense, somehow decided to keep beating. The damage was significant, the doctors told me, but I was stronger than I looked. I would need medication, lifestyle changes, careful monitoring, but I could potentially have years left. Years. The word echoed in my mind like a mockery. My children did eventually visit me, once they realized I wasn't going to die quite as quickly as they had hoped. They came into my room wearing masks of concern, speaking in gentle voices about how worried they had been, how grateful they were that I had pulled through. Sarah held my hand and cried theatrical tears. Michael patted my shoulder awkwardly, and talked about getting me the best care possible. Thomas read me poetry from a book he had brought, his voice catching on certain words, as if he were genuinely moved. I said nothing about what I had heard. I simply watched them, really looked at them for perhaps the first time in years, and saw strangers wearing the faces of my children. When had this happened? When had they become these people who could celebrate my death? Who could reduce a lifetime of love to a dollar amount? Who could toast to an inheritance, while I lay dying 50 feet away? I was released from the hospital 3 weeks later, weak and unsteady but alive. Michael had arranged for a home health aide to stay with me, which I knew was more about protecting his future inheritance than genuine concern for my well-being. I went along with it because I was too tired to fight, too heartbroken to care. But I was not broken. Not entirely. Because as I sat in my small house, the one I had nearly killed myself to pay for, watching the aide bustle around making tea, and checking my medications, a new feeling began to replace the grief. It was cold and clarifying, like ice water running through my veins. It was resolve. I called my lawyer Mr. Patterson, an old man who had handled the simple legal affairs of my life for the past 20 years. I need to change my will, I told him, and my voice was steady for the first time since the hospital. He came to my house the following week, carrying his worn briefcase and wearing the same suit he had probably worn since the 1980s. We sat at my kitchen table, and I told him exactly what I wanted. He looked surprised, even tried to talk me out of it, but I was immovable as stone. "Are you certain about this, Eleanor?" he asked, his pen hovering over the legal pad. "This is a significant change. Your children are not the children I raised." I interrupted. "Please just write it as I've said." And so he did. Over the following months I made my plans carefully, methodically. I contacted St. Vincent's Children's Hospital, a place where I had once volunteered many years ago, reading stories to sick children who reminded me of my own when they were small. I established a trust that would donate my entire estate to the hospital's pediatric cancer ward, to be used for families who couldn't afford treatment. For children who needed someone to fight for them the way I had once fought for mine. I contacted the local community college where Thomas taught and set up a scholarship fund in Richard's name, despite everything. Because those students deserved a chance at education the way my children had. I wanted my money to go to young people who would appreciate it, who would use it to build something beautiful, not to middle-aged children who saw me as nothing more than a financial obstacle standing between them and a larger bank account. But I told my children none of this. Instead, I continued to play the role they expected of me, the grateful mother, the dying woman clinging to her ungrateful children's occasional visits. Sarah came by once a month, always rushing, always distracted, talking about her busy life while checking her phone every few minutes. Michael sent checks to cover expenses and visited quarterly, treating each visit like a business obligation he needed to fulfill. Thomas came most often, and sometimes I saw glimpses of the boy he had been, but those moments were fleeting, overshadowed by the man he had become. They were careful around me now, watching me with the wariness of people who had invested money they couldn't afford to lose, and were protecting their investment. They asked about my health with an edge of anxiety that had nothing to do with love, and everything to do with calculations they were making in their heads. They talked about their financial problems, their struggles, their needs, always circling back to how much they could use some help, some relief, some inheritance. I nodded and smiled and said nothing. 2 years passed this way. 2 years of playing a role, of pretending not to know what I knew, of watching my children visit my small house, and mentally catalogue its contents, pricing everything from my grandmother's china to the paintings on the wall. 2 years of listening to them talk about me in the present tense, while planning for a future where I didn't exist. It should have hurt more than it did, but I had cauterized that wound in the hospital, had let it scar over into something hard and protective. Then, on a spring morning when the cherry trees were blooming and the air smelled like rebirth, I had my lawyer send letters to each of my children, requesting their presence at his office for the reading of my revised will. I was still very much alive, which made the request unusual, but Mr. Patterson had agreed to honor my wishes. They all came, probably expecting good news, perhaps thinking I was adding to their inheritance, or clarifying the distribution. I watched them walk into Mr. Patterson's office from my seat in the corner, watched the confusion on their faces when they saw me sitting there, alive and alert, my back straight for the first time in years. "Ma," Michael said, his voice uncertain. "What's going on? Please, sit," I said, gesturing to the empty chairs. My voice was calm, measured. I had practiced this moment for months. They sat, exchanging worried glances, and Mr. Patterson cleared his throat. "Your mother has asked me to share with you the contents of her revised will," he began, opening a folder on his desk. "Mrs. Eleanor Barrett, being of sound mind and body, has made the following provisions for her estate." I watched their faces as he read, watched the confusion turn to shock, the shock to disbelief, the disbelief to something uglier. The entire estate, everything I had worked for, everything they had been counting on, would be going to St. Vincent's Children's Hospital, and to the scholarship fund at the community college. Nothing would be left for them, not the house, not the savings, not the investments, nothing. The silence when Mr. Patterson finished reading was absolute. Then Sarah stood up so fast her chair fell backward. "You can't do this," she said, her voice shaking with rage. "That money is ours, you promised it to us." "I promised to leave you something," I said quietly. "I'm leaving you the same thing you left me in that hospital hallway, nothing." Michael's face had gone pale. "You heard us," he said, and it wasn't a question, every word. I stood up slowly, my heart beating steadily in my chest, that damaged organ that had somehow survived both the heart attack and the heartbreak that followed. "I was awake, Michael. I heard you counting my money before I was even dead. I heard you toasting to my inheritance while I was fighting for my life. I heard Sarah say it would be a mercy if I died, and I heard you, Thomas, my gentle boy, agree to celebrate at a bar while your mother lay in a hospital bed." Thomas had tears running down his face. "Mom, we were scared, we didn't mean." "Don't," I said, holding up my hand. "Don't insult me with lies. You meant every word. You revealed who you really are, and I'm grateful for it. Better to know the truth than to die believing in a beautiful lie. We're your children," Sarah said, and she was crying now too, but I felt nothing. You deserve exactly what you gave me," I interrupted. "Which is nothing. You want to know what you're inheriting. You're inheriting the knowledge that you threw away your mother's love for money, that was never yours to begin with. You're inheriting the memory of standing in a hospital hallway and celebrating the death of the woman who gave you life. You're inheriting the truth about who you are." "This is cruel," Michael said, but his voice was weak. "Is it? I looked at him, really looked at him, this stranger with my blood. Was I cruel when I worked 3 jobs to put you through college? Was I cruel when I went without so you could have? Was I cruel when I loved you with everything I had, even when you stopped loving me back? None of them had an answer for that. The papers are filed, Mr. Patterson said quietly. The will is legal and binding. When Mrs. Barrett passes, her estate will go to the designated charitable organizations. I walked to the door, my hand steady on the knob. I hope the children at St. Vincent's appreciate what you've lost. I hope the students who get scholarships make something beautiful with the opportunities you've squandered. And I hope, someday, you understand what you've done. I left them sitting in that office. Left them with their shock and their rage, and their realization that their mother's money was going to help strangers, instead of enriching their own lives. I walked out into the spring sunshine feeling lighter than I had in years, feeling something that might have been peace settling into the spaces where love used to live. They tried, of course, to change my mind. Sarah showed up at my door crying, begging forgiveness, swearing she had been going through a difficult time, that stress had made her say terrible things she didn't mean. Michael came with his lawyer, trying to find loopholes, trying to argue that I was incompetent or unduly influenced. Thomas wrote me letters, page after page of apologies and explanations and pleas, his poet's words trying to reshape reality into something more palatable. I read none of the letters. I accepted none of the apologies. I had given them my life, and they had reduced it to a dollar amount and toasted its end. There was no coming back from that. I am 73 years old now, and I live alone in my small house with my tomato garden and my memories. The home health aide still comes, though I pay for her myself now, determined not to die and leave my children, even that small satisfaction of having cared for me. I water my plants and read my books, and sometimes, on cool evenings, I sit on my porch and remember when 3 small children would play in this yard, when their laughter was the most beautiful sound in the world, when I believed that love was enough to build something that would last forever. I know I will die soon. My heart is tired, and I am tired, and I have made my peace with that. When I go, I will go knowing that somewhere, a child with cancer will get treatment because of me. Somewhere, a young person who grew up poor like I did will get an education because of me. I will leave behind something good, something pure, something that isn't tainted by greed or betrayal. My children will get nothing, and that is exactly what they deserve. But here is the truth that keeps me awake some nights. The truth that sits heavy in my chest next to my damaged heart. I would give anything, everything, all the money in the house and the careful plans, just to have them back the way they were. Just to have Michael as a little boy again, serious and watchful, holding my hand like I was his whole world. Just to have Sarah dancing through the house, her laughter like music. Just to have Thomas bringing me injured birds and poetry, his gentle soul untainted by disappointment and greed. I would give anything to not know what I know, to not have heard what I heard, to still believe in the beautiful lie that my children loved me the way I loved them. But we don't get to choose what we know. We don't get to unknow the truth once it's revealed. We don't get to go back to the moment before everything broke and choose a different path. All we get is this: the truth, and what we do with it, and the cold comfort of knowing that we stayed true to ourselves even when those we loved most could not. I am 73 years old, and I am dying, and I am alone. And I would not change a single thing I have done since that terrible morning in the hospital hallway. Because some betrayals are so complete, so absolute, that forgiveness would be its own kind of betrayal. A betrayal of the woman who worked 3 jobs, who sacrificed everything, who loved with a purity that deserved better than what she received. I owe her justice. Even if justice looks like 3 empty chairs at my funeral and a children's hospital filled with hope. Especially then.